All right, so we are back. Welcome back, everybody. We are about to kick off our session, the Growth Playbook and Scaling for Success. I'm going to be joined with some industry experts and professionals, and we're going to be talking about the ever-evolving challenges for manufacturers to actually scale what's been working for them, not just now, but all the way into 2060, as Mr. Pillar said yesterday and beyond. Our panel of experts are going to share use cases for manufacturers and best practices for navigating advanced technologies, AI, product disruptions, and the fragmented reality across multiple factories to help you tackle operational and technology challenges to stay ahead of the competition. I'm excited for this one. I know you all are too. I'm going to introduce my panel. Actually, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Charlie Sheridan from Google Cloud. Charlie, how's it going?
Hey, Drew. Thanks for the invitation. Great to be here. So, hey, I'm Charlie. I'm the Global Technical Director within our Manufacturing, Automotive, and Energy division. So I basically lead a team of wonderful solution architects and technical folks who develop manufacturing data platform and AI solutions for manufacturing. We're a global team. We work very closely with Litmus with our Manufacturing Connect Edge, Manufacturing Data Engine solution. So happy to be here and looking forward to the panel. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for being here, Charlie. Next, we'll kick it to Mr. Michael Jerzykowski. Michael, how's it going?
It's going okay. Thank you. So I am the principal plant electrical automation controls engineer for Trani here in San Leandro, California. So, and basically I lead the electrical and controls departments here inside the facility for our manufacturing processes here at Trani. So.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And finally, we've got Dave. Dave, give him a brief introduction if you could.
Thanks, Drew. Dave McMorrin, Director of Sales Engineering here at Litmus. I've been in the manufacturing space for over 25 years and, happy to have discussion about scaling and things we're talking about today. So I was looking forward to a great session here. Thanks, Drew.
Fantastic. Well, let's take it away. I'm going to start with Mr. Jerzykowski. Michael, can you please share a specific success story from your or a client's operations where they were able to effectively implement technologies and then scale that for now and beyond?
Well, perfect example is our existing, we just installed a new OEE system for basically calculating and monitoring OEE through our manufacturing and process production lines. We initially implemented the system. We added it for just one of our initial production lines, and then we've now since then scaled it up to we're actually communicating across 4 lines. And so the system has definitely been a boon for the company in being able to calculate and show what our OEE performance is and how we're able to use it for not only a management tool for showing how we're operating as a plant as a whole, but it also is showing us, it's allowing our maintenance department to focus more effectively on what pieces of equipment and equipment centers need to be supported and additional maintenance done to improve their overall performance.
So paint a picture for me, if you could, and for our audience. What did that process or that pathway look like? How do we identify which processes or which silo, I guess, to speak, to start to scale and to build out this new move that we're going to be doing? And what were maybe some of the pitfalls or key strategies that you looked at going into this?
I would say that the initial pitfalls for us as a company is this was a first foray from Tarani's perspective into this type of technology and this type of a system. So a lot of it was simply, and I think a lot of industry is still they don't know what they don't know. So we wind up being in a situation where we kind of went into it having a idea of what we wanted, but really not understanding what it was we needed to do to get to the net result of achieving those kind of ambiguous goals. So I think that was the biggest pitfall that we took, and it took us a while of just trying to figure out what type of a system, what do we, because there's plenty of off-the-shelf systems that come with prepackaged applications that could be used, and they're very flashy and they're great. But starting to dig into it, we realized, hey, this isn't what we needed. We needed something that was more customizable to our own particular needs. So we wound up taking a lot more time than originally expected, just in the development side of figuring out what it was we needed and how to proceed forward. So
fantastic, great insights. Charlie and Dave, feel free to jump in. Have you all seen anything, or have you all had your own scaling journeys, or a client that you all have worked with that you've helped on this journey, and what did that journey look like?
Yeah, I can jump in, and I agree with everything that Michael said. I think if talking about strategies, I think it's super important that you have the right people in the room to set that strategy, right? So I mean, we deal with OT and IT, right? So I think bringing both of those groups together can be quite interesting and challenging if it's, let's say, a greenfield operation where these two teams may not have sat down and really worked on a large data strategy together. So I think just in terms of strategy, and it also can sometimes be a challenge, but getting those teams to align and to basically get aligned on the problem statement, get aligned on the opportunity. And I think Michael was saying it, like you start off, we think that we're going to do X, but we may tweak it a little bit as we go, right? So I think it's super important that you basically get a very good alignment and buy-in all the way from the top. And that's sort of how we face it, right? So when we go into a pilot opportunity, we basically bring together all of the right people in the room, right? I mean, that is super important. Identify what are those key challenges, what are the KPIs you want to go after, if it's OE, if it's quality, whatever. We bring all that together, and then we design the solution around those challenges. And I think if you do that from the start with a very solid foundation, your opportunity for success is so much higher. And then also you can help scale that across. So I think that's sort of the key. Go ahead.
It sounds like the team is one of the most integral parts, and it seems as if we have to make sure that this team is comprised of people who not only have great input on these processes, but also, as Michael said earlier, you've got to kind of be willing to color outside of the lines. Is there any key strategies that you guys have found in maybe identifying key players on their team? It does seem like, Charlie, you said there's got to be representation on different levels, but B, how do we say there is no cookie cutter solution? We're going to blaze this path, but we've got to stay focused. How do we stay focused on the solution and the scalability when all of this stuff is pretty new?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, I would say having the right level of sponsorship is critical. That keeps people focused, right? So that there's a deliverable and there's a goal. I mean, there's got to be the right level of key sponsorship, and there has to be a predefined goal with success criteria. We're not doing this just for fun, right? It's got to be done to actually deliver a benefit to the organization, and it's got to be driven at the top level. That's the way I like to think about it.
Yeah,
There's no secret sauce, but that's it. Sorry, Dave.
No, it's okay. You're right. No secret sauce. Sorry. Just to kind of add to that, one of the things I think the best practices are, just like you said, Charlie, is sit down and plan out what what are you really trying to do with it. I see failures when people are trying to do more of the experimentation, right? And we're talking about scalability. So we'll go in and somebody in IT says, hey, OT, get me data, and do it through MQTT to the cloud, something like that, right? So they go through and they send the data. So they go buy a product that does that. And then IT says, well, you're sending too much data, slow it down, or we want to transform the data. Then they buy another piece on top of that to fix that problem. And then there's like, well, we need a broker now. So then they buy another piece. because they're not planning ahead. They didn't plan it, so they don't know exactly what they want. So they're just buying pieces on top of it to patch whatever problem they uncover next. Okay, and I get what's happening. It's new, right? Like you said, Drew, it's all the new topic. The problem that happens is you finally get it to work, but you ended up buying 5, 6 different pieces of software to accomplish it. And then management says, hey, what you did, we love it. It's great. Now do it at 100 plants. And then you just see the guys who are like, oh no, right? How am I going to do that? So I think you really do need to plan this out ahead of time. And that's where I see a big misstep in the beginning, is that, because it's not just scalability of other plants, but you can also talk about scalability of the different use cases, for example, where you can start. I like to Michael's topic. Hey, I don't want to have to go program a bunch of stuff when I add a new machine or new line, right? I just want to add the new line and have it all magically show up, plug and play. Which there's technologies out there now with message brokers, with different tools that we have now to make that really feasible. So I think planning out what you really want to do and planning for the, all those cases that are down the road of adding more equipment, adding more plants, how are you going to make all this work, I think is key to that.
So how do we start to identify what I guess we would call responsible scaling, right? Because it can be obviously a daunting task. And then once you cross that finish line, maybe at one plant, is it 5 plants that you go to? Is it, your whole build out? Is it, one at a time as we perfect and improve these processes? What is some things that you all have seen that have maybe been a good path forward for companies that have identified good processes, put together a team, planned a way forward? How do we start implementing that? And is there any specific way, or what has worked for you all? Michael, I'll let you go first.
From our perspective, we had the benefit of time on the front end to where we can research what was available and out there. So we knew, as this was the first foray into this, that it was always going to be a scalable system, that we were going to first start in our West Coast facility. And then we already have our 10-year plan that shows, okay, we have additional manufacturing facilities that are going to be implemented over the next 10 years. So when we made our decisions up front, we said, okay, we need a system that can grow with us, not just at this facility, but at the facilities that we expand to in the future. So, I think a lot of it, for our perspective, was just having the foresight to be realizing, hey, this is the approach and this is the goal we're going to. As for scalability with teams, as we didn't know exactly all the resources that were necessary to implement the system in the beginning, we have, like myself and my team, we handle mainly the OT side of the facility. So we're dealing with what's going on the plant floor, the internal networks, the communications from equipment centers to equipment centers. But we also started to realize, there's definitely an IT involvement in this, and we have to merge the two in the resources. So by our initial work and efforts, now going forward, we have a good understanding for our future manufacturing facilities. Okay, these are the resources that are going to be required to do this going forward here at this facility, as well as implementing it in our future manufacturing facilities, to being able to support those same efforts and gain the same type of a functioning system at those locations.
Thank you, Michael. I want to bring you all's attention really quickly to a new poll that is ready right now. Everybody in the chat, please hit that poll up. Where is your plant being impacted the most? There's several different options on there. Go hit up the poll, let your vote be heard. And also, we've got a question from the chat. We have, let's see here, our friend Kevin Holbrook. Kevin says, how do you find a path forward with existing IT OT departments who have settled on cloud or on-prem data solutions? There's some examples there. when your product or solution leverages different storage technologies? Great question, Kevin.
Charlie, you want to handle that one? I could add my 2 cents if I want.
Yeah,
I'm sure you deal with that all the time.
Right.
Yeah, it's again, I'm saying, is there one answer that fits all? Probably not. It's a great question from Kevin. Yeah, look, it's a tricky one, but I think what we have in the solutions that we deploy is flexibility. So we basically give the customer the flexibility to put the data wherever they want, right? And also, there's quite interesting scenarios as well where basically you can go cross cloud, right? So for instance, we have a solution called BigQuery Omni, where the data can reside in other clouds and we can access that data to basically do some advanced analytics on it as well. So there's a number of different ways of dealing with the challenge. I think, a lot of different companies have different security data rules as well, right? Versus on-prem versus on cloud. But I think there is technical solutions where you can traverse across different clouds if you want to go that way. But I mean, ultimately, you want to give the end customer the flexibility, right? So where you want to put that data, where you want to store it, we can make that happen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, Charlie, I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with it. Flexibility is really the key to that. And great question, Kevin. But the way I look at it, the way I want to approach that is, right, okay, they've settled on it. And it's just like with dealing with OT, right? We talk to OT and it's like, hey, we're going to start collecting data. And they're like, don't screw with my process, right? Don't mess with it, because then I'm going to get, I'll get fired, or, my machine without whatever. So what I like to do is try to say, we're not going to touch it. We're just going to be in parallel. So yeah, they might have sending data to MS SQL. Well, that data is coming from somewhere. Well, let's capture that data and create a new path for the data into another storage solution. So you're not affecting what they're doing. You're not changing anything they're doing. You're just creating a new path that doesn't affect them directly, and handle the data that way. So that would probably be the way I would handle it as well. Just don't interfere with what they're trying to do.
So let's dip into that. I mean, that's a great segue into looking at some of these early poll results. It looks like 66.7% of voters who participated are saying mixing legacy and new systems together is one of the ways their plan is being impacted the most. And when we talk about scaling these things, a lot of times we're bringing new systems in to scale what we were doing already on legacy systems. So you do have that mixing and I like what Dave talked about. Maybe we use the legacy systems, take that same data, put it into these new systems, so we are transitioning. Michael or Charlie or Dave, any of you all, how are we doing this? How are we solving this issue right now?
Well, I think from my perspective is we have our manufacturing facility, we're a company that's, they like to say 95 years young, but we have equipment that goes back 30 years. And so to being able to pull data, pull information off of these legacy systems that even in some cases where the manufacturers of the equipment have retired them, it has definitely been a challenge. And so developing a system to be able, at least from the OT side, developing a system that could be able to communicate both from a networking Ethernet type situation or being an old serial type of communications, and being able to pull that data and being able to pull the information in is a constant challenge, because unfortunately we've got some applications that we just can't upgrade the system right now because they don't have was technology improving and getting great, getting much better in some ways. There are some specialized applications that we just can't replace it yet because there isn't a system, so we're having to keep things going. So there's definitely a transition. We started off with our equipment in our system where we were using, when we built this facility here in the last few years, where we were bringing all of our OT data in via like a Pi Historian, where we're bringing the data in, and then as we've progressed with implementing our OEE system that we're now using for collecting the OEE data, we're now transitioned. So now it's a SQL, it's a SQL application where we're pulling data in on an on-site server, so a virtualized server. So we are transitioning from what was the old to the new, and then our next stage is going to an AWS server for being able to store data via the cloud. So that is the future, and that will be the kind of the migration path as we've taken. But it is definitely continuing, will be a challenge for being able to support it. And as we go more to the cloud-based side, for our perspective, is definitely requiring a much larger IT involvement to being able to support the system. It's not just us on the floor, it's both sides of the coin. So
behind the curtain. Well, let's talk to the guy behind the curtain. Charlie, what is your input from the cloud?
Yeah, no, I think Michael sort of talked at it from the challenges, and we see this all the time, right? Because, there's a lot more brownfield than greenfield, unfortunately. So we have to deal with that challenge all the time. But I think, building on what Michael said, we can take it from the data side, right? So I think one of the things that we've done quite a really good job with, and especially with the partnership with Litmus on Manufacturing Connect Edge, is irrespective of all these different data formats, right? We take all this raw data, different protocols, different formats. We basically take that into the next layer where we can do some processing on it, right? So we standardize the messages, the payload, the structure, and then basically we take it to the next layer where we contextualize that data. So depending on all of these different data formats, by the time we get it into BigQuery, let's say, for example, which is our cloud storage or cloud database, or we basically get it into a point where all of these assets are contextualized, they're standardized, they have the metadata patched. So taking all that messy, noisy data, and as it traverses its way from the factory floor through Litmus, through Manufacturing Connect Edge, through our data processing pipelines, all the way through, we're taking away that noise. We're basically contextualizing it. So when it gets addressed into our databases, it's in a format that's quite usable, right, to drive use cases like Michael mentioned with OEE and others. So that's the approach that we take. And then essentially you have the factory operational twin or digital twin. So that's the approach that we take. And it's been quite successful. We've demonstrated this across numerous different industries with the great help of Litmus as well. But that's the approach, right? We got to abstract away all that noise and get it one consistent contextualized solution. So when this data is in the cloud, it's easy for anybody to build on use cases and get value from that data.
Yeah, and to add to that, Michael and Charlie, you got it. Yeah, thank you. You added. Michael said something that was interesting to me and you alluded to it earlier, Charlie, which is the flexibility in the system. So Michael, as you're moving from an on-prem SQL database and now move to cloud, there's that path again, right? You're creating a new path for that data to cloud. Plus, you can do it in parallel, right? So if you have a flexible enough system, you're pointing the data to the cloud. You can still keep the SQL running, make sure it's vetted out, make sure it's working properly, and then finally switch over completely, right? So you're giving that flexibility and giving you a pathway no matter what technology gets added, right? So when you decide to switch to GCP, it's easy to move that data over, right? Or to Kevin's question earlier, to be able to get data, out of those systems, because I look at that, it's just another data source, right? Whether it lands in SQL or lands anywhere else, it's just another data source. So like you mentioned, Charlie, pulling data from other clouds, it's a data source for you. So it's just interesting to have that flexibility to do that kind of thing.
Michael, being on the floor and in the fire, have you seen more barriers and obstacles in making this transition on the floor or in the IT side? I know you said that you guys have found you're going to have to lean heavier on IT more than maybe you thought. How is that being received? Are people that are updating their systems and on the floor having to kind of change processes, as Dave talked about earlier, or people on the IT side that are saying, hey, these are, new systems. I'm used to this and I'm having to learn this or switch over to this. Are you seeing a pushback, particularly on one side more than the other? and how are we handling that?
Well, I think that I'm seeing more from my perspective. Obviously, I'm coming from the OT side, but I think from where I get the most pushback is from the IT side, and a lot of it is that our IT group is primarily the business oriented through the front end of the facility. They're used to dealing with business enterprise type applications for collecting data, finance, etc. So now all of a sudden being pushed into a situation where we're having to interface to an OT based system, that has been a challenge for them. I find that don't get me wrong, there's absolutely IT groups and IT people out there that are fine with being able to interface the IT environment to the OT world. However, it is a specialized skill set. I think, dealing with, communicating to a historian, dealing with communications via like PLCs and other equipment that is OT related versus dealing with, a business type environment. And so that's been my biggest struggle with the system, is trying to instill some of the OT knowledge onto our IT department. Not that I'm trying to say anything negative in that regard. It's just something that they're not used to.
And that's where we're moving into. I think that's like kind of the rock and the hard place that we're in right now. But it's such an awesome opportunity if you think about it, right? Where we are kind of shifting into that mix of the two. Dave, you were about to chime in a little bit. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think, Michael, to your point, I think there's also the flip of that is the OT is learning from IT about scalability, new technologies, other ways of handling those kinds of things. So I think it kind of goes both ways from that standpoint. I know I've learned a lot from the IT space.
I think also there is a certain, just to speak a little bit more onto that, because there's two sides of this coin here between IT and OT. I think there is, from both sides, there is the security aspect and the concerns of, okay, do we, on the plant floor, we're normally an isolated bubble that we don't have to worry about a lot of the security aspects of attacks or anything like that, because we're an isolated bubble on the floor, versus the IT environment. So the mixing of data and the mixing of the two layers is still a little bit of, I think the biggest rub or the biggest concern that both sides have is to, okay, how do we do this in such a way without causing us to have, bringing on additional concerns or issues or problems for either side. So.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes the metrics are diametrically opposed to each other, right? It's like OT is trying to get more data out and do more stuff and more systems, and IT is like, no, trying to lock all that down. So it's just, there's finding the middle ground, which I think it's happening. I've been seeing this in the last, while I've been at Litmus, is the transition where, IT and OT are starting to understand each other and work together a little bit. I actually keep seeing what IT actually being a revenue adder, not taking away from the bottom line, but adding to the bottom line, with things like machine learning models and stuff that's usually coming out of the IT group, not the OT group. So I think they can actually start getting information and democratizing the data, like we spoke about before, back to the OT space. Actually, they're not just in my way anymore. They're actually helping me with, making better product, more product, and those kind of things. So
Absolutely,
I think I'm seeing that transition. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I think it's the us versus them scenario. I think between OT and IT, it's definitely breaking down, right? And I think, they have to work together. If we're moving more towards cloud-based solutions or even hybrid cloud edge, then I think you absolutely cannot do that without both teams, really, really synergistically working together. And I think that's super, super important. And Dave's point is spot on, right? I was going to have a similar input. As the world moves, if you're generating more and more data, you're going to need more and more IT-based solutions, right? So particularly AI-based solutions in the future to help you. The benefit then is you're getting more visibility into your machines, your uptime, your parts maintenance. There's no doubt these two worlds are going to become much, much more integrated. And I think there has to be a new approach to, it's not OT, IT, it's one factory level enterprise, I think is probably a better way of describing it in the future. So I think that's going to be a paradigm shift I think we'll see.
Well, let's take a question from Paul Parker Johnson that's kind of along those lines. Paul asked in the chat, do you see data normalizing? You know, talking about getting to that future, do you see it normalizing with helping to strip away barriers when there are multiple storage techniques involved?
We're doing that today. So that's exactly how we're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean,
the answer is yes.
Yes, it's there today. We can give you a solution right now with Google Cloud and Litmus.
Well, I think part of that question is, you know, using JSON or other, but you know, JSON's pretty much the way that data is being, you know, converted to, and there's a reason for that, right? We all use JSON. Every time you click a button on any website, it's using JSON to transmit the data. So it's just something that's been so, you know, prevalent in the IT space. It's not even really a question about whether to use JSON or not. I've talked to OT side and I start saying JSON and it's, you know, some deer in headlights sometimes because I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think that's, again, changing as people are learning because, again, this is a new space for most of us. So we're still kind of, you know, learning some of the tools that are out there. But yeah, I think that's just a standard common format that is very usable and very scalable and, you know, people understand it. And there's plenty of tools, you know, to Charlie's point. Yeah, convert that PLC to JSON and you can send it anywhere. You can send it to databases, message brokers, cloud, whatever, you know, whatever you need to.
Do you know or have you seen of any tactics that kind of remove or start to remove that deer in the headlights type of situation from OT, or what, Michael, maybe have you seen that smoothens that transition into this hybridized IT OT world that we're trying to move into?
I think the biggest thing between to smooth out the process is communications between the two departments and the two groups. Having open channels of communications, because obviously we each have our own objectives and our own thoughts on how to do things. So communicating, outlining the plan, being transparent on both sides is the biggest thing I can recommend. And that in our cases was the biggest thing that helped us transition and kind of, you know, bridge the gap is the transparency, being straightforward with each other as to what goals, what things we needed to accomplish and what the end results needed to be, and working together on how to getting there. So that would say my biggest thing for everybody is just be open, be straightforward with each other, and provide good lines of communications to achieve whatever objectives are on both sides.
Yeah, I think also this aligns with the bringing the right people in that Charlie was alluding to and we spoke about yesterday, getting the right people in the room. Because if I have an OT and an IT person sitting in a meeting with me and we start talking about PLC connectivity, the OT person is going to get exactly what I'm talking about, and maybe the IT doesn't. Okay, but they have confidence in their colleague that is shaking their head. Okay, yeah, that's great. And it's the same the other way. I start talking to IT about JSON and cloud and all these other, you know, security and firewalls. The OT person might not understand it, but as long as their colleague does, I think that's a comforting feeling so that they can start learning and be comfortable with this newer technology. But that's what I've seen in meetings.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Dave. I think the lines are getting more and more blurred, right?
Yeah.
Going into the future, and I think that's going to be important, right? You're going to see a lot more of these technologies pushing further and further down into the OT world. I think that's inevitable.
Yeah, I think when I'm talking to customers, if I'm talking just OT, I'm asking, hey, can we bring IT into this conversation? Or if I'm just talking to IT, it's like, can we bring OT in? Because it's going to be a collaborative effort, right? You're not going to succeed unless you do it that way. Ideally, there's already a team set up. That's my favorite. Is, you know, we've already got a team with OT, IT, business already put together.
And that starts with leadership, right? So it's going to take most likely an innovative leader, or at least a visionary leader that understands these concepts and sees these things coming to form as we're talking about. They see the blending of the IT and the OT. They see, mixing the systems. They see these things on the horizon, and they've got to consciously not only make the decision to say, we're going to have both people at the table making having discussions so we can make our plan for the future. But then we're also going to make sure that this is part of our credo or our overall culture here, that we move accordingly and we move into this next phase as one team. And this is what's expected, the mixing of the two. Mike, back to you real quickly. What innovative solutions have we not talked about that you guys have seen some success with in your scaling?
Oh, actually, that's a good question. As for things that we haven't talked about, I think we've kind of covered all of the items that we have had to deal with. We're new into this effort. We've been working on this for the last year and a half or so. So I think we've kind of covered it. The biggest thing that I will say that our partnership with Litmus in regards to helping develop, putting together the use cases, putting together the system, answering those questions of what we don't know, was the biggest asset to us moving forward with the progression of the system. So that's what I can say is probably the biggest thing, would be partnering with a good company that has an experience, has a track record for being able to achieve the goals that you're wanting to achieve. And that's why we, in the end, through all of our processes of trying to determine what was the best way or best type of system to build, is why we eventually came to work with Litmus. So biggest thing, bring in the right people to your project.
Absolutely. That's my very first
Drew,
point. I think it's super important. You're on mute there, Drew.
You're on mute, Drew. Yeah, I think it's people. That's a recurring theme. I keep seeing these recurring conversations or recurring points. I think one of the mistakes that I see are, one, I referred to it earlier, not planning. But to Michael, to your point, like, you don't know what you don't know. So I'll be in situations where I'll talk to somebody and they want to send, we're collecting 100,000 tags and we're just going to pipe it right up to cloud. And my response is like, do you have any idea how much that's going to cost to land that? Because I don't think you thought that part through yet. So I try to help guide some people without trying to step on toes with that as well. Do you see that, Charlie? Do you see?
Yeah, sometimes it's.
I mean, just architectures that are like that you can already tell it's not going to work because you have the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it definitely won't scale, right? So you'll end up with a data swamp. That's
right.
essentially it, right? So I think that's what you got to be careful with. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But that's where we help, right? I mean, we have that expertise. We're there to help and provide advice. We don't have all the answers, but we'll collaborate with you to get to what you want, right? I mean, that's just takes time.
Yeah, I know we've been talking about teams as in our internal teams, but that team really should include the cloud vendor, edge vendor, the vendors that you can decide you want to work with. They should be part of the team as well.
I think so too, and I think that's the next question. Going off of what Michael said. Michael said that they understood and they knew that it would benefit them most if they partnered with people that were experts in this field that could help them identify what they did not know, right? And that's major. We keep talking about you only know what you know. Dave and Charlie, how have you all been able to focus on being the experts, or at least being the leaders, and seeing what those blind spots are, and how are you helping companies identify those things in order for them to be able to scale like Michael?
I mean, a lot of it is down to experience, right? We've been in this game a long time, but
you've been burned before.
Exactly. That's exactly it. A better way of putting it, Dave. No, but also we get the view across multiple companies, right? So we're
Right.
working with, large enterprises across everything from large enterprises to, small, medium enterprises. So we get to see the total scale and the challenges, and we get to see, the hard problems across all of these different environments, right? So, I mean, every industry has got their own specific challenges. And I think that's the advantage of working with companies like us, with Litmus, right? I mean, we've probably seen a high percentage of the challenges that you're going to address. And that allows us then to tailor and build our solutions to try and preemptively address the majority of those challenges. So when we give you a solution, look, it's going to have, I'd say, a very high percentage of what you need, but we also make it in a way that it's configurable, right? So you can do that last 5% or whatever it takes, right? We just give you the ability to do it. But a lot of it is down to the experience that we have of working across multiple industries. But also, we always leave space for that final configuration, right? That's super important because Michael might want to do, his configuration in a very specific way. That's okay. We'll allow you to do that, but you'll get the benefit of all of the other technology development that we've been able to pull together over the last few years from multiple customers of all sizes.
Right. I completely agree with that, Charlie, because we're seeing so many different architecture in different industries, right? Chemical industry, strict ISA 95, firewall security. There are solutions for that to address problems that they're going to have, right? And just because of the experience we have.
Yep.
All right. Well, Michael, any final takeaways for our audience here about scaling, pitfalls, and successes?
Sorry, it wouldn't unmute. I would say the biggest thing for, at least in my mind, is like as I spoke before, is lay out a plan in the beginning. Look at what your goals are from the start when you start looking at a system. I realize that isn't always the case, where sometimes we jump into it and now we've got a system and it's not very scalable. But the biggest thing I can tell everybody is, if you're new to it or you're just starting in the system, try to look at your long-term goals for whatever type of system you're going to implement from day one, so that you don't build yourself into a corner or where you've got roadblocks that are going to limit your growth beyond what you're initially thinking of your system. Try to think ahead, look at the big picture. So.
Fantastic. Charlie, anything before we go?
I think totally agree with what Michael said, but I think it's back to the very first point that I made, right? It's all about the team, having the right group of people together with the right level of sponsorship and thinking, big picture. So I think that's pretty much it. But again, as Dave and I just said, there's lots of experience here to help. You're not on your own, right? We can help guide that journey.
All right. Well, myself and Dave are going to hang around, and we're going to bring our friend Mr. Decker back in. Charlie and Michael, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for your expertise. And I know the chat got a lot of great stuff from that, and everybody watching did as well. So thank you for joining us here today. We'll see you guys again soon.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye, guys.
Yeah, bye.
Mark, so you were patiently waiting and checking out this fantastic panel. What are some of your key takeaways as a third party, somebody that was just watching in?
Well, I think it was a great panel. I think some really good topics there. I really like the idea of the sponsorship piece. Like, that's so important. You have to have the right people driving what you're doing, or else it's going to fizzle and die. And that sponsorship drives accountability for the project. So important. And then obviously having the right team was mentioned a few times. This has been a common theme throughout this whole broadcast is involving the right people at the right time, making sure that you've got engagement. So I think those two things really stood out, and then having the right goals, like the long-term goals, so you've got something in mind that you can continue to drive to.
Fantastic.
Hey, Mark, I have a question for you. So we're talking about scalability and bringing the right team in. You have a project management background. You got to Litmus, but being such a new product, because I use your workshop process and the infrastructure workshops and the device connection workshops and the use case, those kinds of things, and follow that process, which made it really smooth. But I can't imagine you came into Litmus and had all that ready. I got to think that that's something that you grew. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think as Charlie mentioned, experience is important, but then you summed it up correctly. Been burned enough times, you tend to try to avoid it unless you enjoy it, but I don't. So yeah, my background is technical, and then I got into the program project manager stuff. And what I learned early on when I was back at GM and then later on at Rolls-Royce was the planning aspect. I think that was brought up in the last session as well. You have to know what you're going to do, and then if you know that, you can then structure what you need to do and what the prerequisites are. And the prerequisites drive getting, again, the right people in the room so that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Everybody knows what kind of information they have to be responsible for providing into the project, so that when you're going through the project, there's no surprises. You know that you're going to need IP addresses, so plan for those at the beginning. You know you're going to need network changes, so identify what those rules are going to be, identify the people who are going to make them, and get them involved on day one, and then get them to give you the estimate so you can come up with the right schedule, so you know what the long poles in the tent are. So yeah, the things that you see with Litmus and our implementations, they're tried and true practices that I've done for years and years and years, and modified slightly for this type of an implementation. But my background has been in manufacturing, rolling out systems, rolling out entire plants, and it's planning, prerequisites, workshops, getting everybody talking, and eliminating surprises, and that usually is a good recipe for success.
So I want to jump to
Thanks.
that. Mark, that was fantastic. I want to get this in before we introduce the next session and get you all's take on this. It kind of goes along with, what we were talking about yesterday and earlier this morning. When we typically have decision makers, this is from Mr. Khalid in the chat, the C-suite decision makers layers in the OT environment are used to assess any investment based on ROI and NPV. And I believe this is one of the most common challenges when introducing advanced analytic solutions, which is somehow not easy to, it looks like, gauge or guide, right? And it sounds like what Mr. Khalid is trying to say is, when we have decision makers in this room, traditionally, these have been people that have looked at bottom lines. They looked at, hard numbers. They're looking at dollars, right? And sometimes, the way that we're moving, the people that should be at the table and in the room are looking at different KPIs, and their ROI is different than traditional dollars and cents that just show up in the beginning, right? Maybe it turns into dollars and cents, but for now it's, maybe processes becoming easier. My job being easier for me to do, me being more enabled, which then turns into dollars and cents, and we can't really quantify that in between right now. How do we begin to invite some of those people into this table for when we talk about this initial conversation of scaling, how to scale, how to get there, what to scale, and what that return will be?
Yeah, that's a great question, Khalid. And we run into that quite often, where because we're collecting data and allowing people to then analyze the data to find problems, and then from that find solutions, we're not actually solving a problem other than the data collection part of it, right? So it's nearly impossible to, you just can't predict it. I've seen ROIs on software products that are hours. They plug it in, it starts collecting data. It's like, oh, we didn't know that was happening, and they fix it right away, and it paid for itself. The opposite is you can be collecting data, and it might be a longer process to get to that improvement and that ROI. But what I can guarantee is there eventually would be an ROI. Nobody's running perfectly. There's always room for improvement. So the way I like to approach it is, what are the goals for the corporation, or what are the plant goals? So for instance, reducing OEE from 75, or from, increasing OEE from 71 to 75. Okay, we're part of that solution, because you need to at least start collecting the data to find out where what your root causes are, so you can then go fix them. So you need to approach it from that way of like, this is a tool to help you with a different goal, because there is an ROI on that 71 to 75. They can put a number to that. So if they can reach that, then we'd be part of it. I think the way to approach it is to say, okay, I want to go from 71 to 75. If I go from 71 to 73, that's going to return this. As long as I can do that, I'll cover my costs, or something along those lines. And then anything above that is going to be bottom line. So I think you have to change how the thinking and the approach on that is, to say, we're going to enable you to find savings that will create an ROI. We just don't know what they are now, but they are there.
Kind of like an intermediary or pre-ROI, so to speak. That'll be the first step to the point they want to get to. Mark?
Well, I think I'm going to use the cell phone analogy again that Dave brought up before. Was you have to get that technology, or you have to make the decision that you're gonna go down this road, and you don't know what it's going to lead you to. And so I think there's a boldness and a risk-taking approach that comes with this at times, because if there's nothing evident or you don't see it, that doesn't mean it's not there. So by going down this road, and as Dave rightly said, you may not know what the ROI is, but you have to have the faith and the trust at times that there's something there, and that the right thing is to get the data out and start using it to find out where the problems actually are. So a lot of times when there's problems on a line and a process, what's the first thing you turn to is you measure the data, and you find out what it should be doing, and then what it is actually doing. This is kind of the same thing. You have to make sure you can measure things with data, because if you can't measure it, you can't tell if it's working right. If you can't tell it's working right, you're blind. So I think it's a whole journey, a whole mindset shift that says use the data to enable your processes rather than just doing the status quo.
So any tips for, because if I'm an OEM or I'm a large manufacturer, that is a risk that is probably easier for me to take, because I can probably afford to invest more, maybe bleed a little bit more to see, if this process is going to work or how to make it work, right? Any tips for mom and pops? Any tips for those medium manufacturers to be more able to take this risk, or be less, scared or susceptible to this risk, because where it could hurt them a little bit more making the investment, I think the returns for, the medium sized and smaller manufacturers are, exponential. They're even bigger for those bigger shops.
Yeah, I think first tip is start small, like always, and engage your workers. The people who know best, and this goes back to Drew, you said it best, build your bench with data. So if you adopt that mindset and you start to build your bench with data, well, in a small company, your guys on the floor know everything that's going on usually, right? So give them the data, ask them what they need, involve them in the process. Don't just think go ask and go collect some data and experiment and test, plan, do, check, act. I think Brett mentioned that yesterday, right? And you only do that with data, right? You have to measure. So start small, engage your team, and get the data that they think they need, and then refine it as you go.
Yeah, and start small. For instance, Mark, along those lines is, you don't have to start with cloud, like Michael was talking about. He's storing it locally, right? He's doing everything locally with plans of moving it, because what they're doing is proving out that, hey, this is valuable. Now we want to start doing this at other plants, and now we want to have all that data aggregate somewhere else. Well, cloud's perfect for that, right?
Yeah,
so
we don't have to go there. I agree 100%.
Right. Yeah. So it's that starting small is, you don't have to get all the pieces, right? You don't have to jump into machine learning, right? Start with small applications.
Do the basics, yeah.
Right.
Do the basics: dashboard, asset health, asset monitoring, alerting. Just doing that, being able to alert your shop floor people to a machine that's in danger of going down, saves you time right there, because you don't have to monitor, you don't have to be watching a screen. You get a text on a cell phone. That right there starts to get you some return on investment. It makes people, again, more efficient. They can do something else, or they can work when they are needed to work, not walk around aimlessly looking for problems.
Right.
And think about the amount of the problem, right? If in that particular instance, if I'm an operator, I'm about to press this button to start running this next widget or machine, whatever's going on. Before I press that button, I get an alert, and I can alert maintenance, or I can begin to, change tools out, or whatever it may be that it's about to fail. If it's something that's on my level, if I don't get that text, I'll start this machine, and the failure could happen in process, which means not only is this machine down, but now this material that was in this machine that could be, anything. It could be ink, it could be something that's super expensive, or we could be 3 parts deep into this process where this has already been to 2 different machines, and now this crash or this failure is not just a machine thing. This is a part thing. This is something that is keeping this thing going out the door, and we've got to order new material, start back at 1, and then go forward. Dave, I cut you off a little bit.
No, it's okay. It's interesting because this actually ties into the next session where we're talking about the shadow IT, Mark, right? Or that you coined it at the company. Is I think one of the problems, if you're starting that small, and Michael talked about this at Trani, they looked at some off-the-shelf applications, but they also found that it was too limiting, right? This off-the-shelf product stopped at the OEE calculation. It didn't have the foresight to say, now I want to go to cloud, now I want to do this. And that's what we see all the time, is people having to build these kind of offshoots of shadow IT, building small applications to solve something because they don't have the tools for that. So I think it ties in with the planning and getting the right people, like where do you want to go? And instead of having to buy something, that can do the job that you want right now, but you're not thinking far enough down the road that will tie in with cloud, machine learning, digital twins, all that other stuff, because that's coming. And that's a short-sightedness I see with companies, because they don't know what they don't know. And we've seen it where the people go down a path and then they get stuck because they chose a platform that doesn't have the flexibility to do the next step that they don't even know they need yet.
That makes sense. And starting off small, like you guys suggested, allows you to cost effectively start to identify those things in the beginning, instead of, like you said, spending a lot of money, getting an out of the box solution, and then finding out year 2, year 5 that it's not exactly going to help you. And then you got to go back and plug and play with different things and find out what those things are and figure those out as you're already in the process of scaling. That could be very detrimental. But speaking of the next session, let's talk about it. Shadow IT and corporate initiatives, balancing the needs of plant and enterprise. We've got some great guests coming on this one, some returning guests, and some new ones that we have not heard from yet. Mark and Dave, what are you excited most about this next session?
That Mark's going to be presenting. That's
I knew you'd say that, Dave.
Thank
you. That's why I can't wait for our podcast. I want more of that. I'm really excited about this one, because throughout my career, like Shadow IT it's that dark secret where you have your corporate systems, but then you always have this interesting montage of systems that run alongside the corporate systems that are doing a lot of the work at the plants, kind of in secret. They're not really sponsored by IT. They're funded usually locally by the plant, but they serve a purpose, and they do a good job because they're very specific. They're very purpose built for what they need to do. But that comes with some downfalls, especially now these days with security. Back in the early days, the security wasn't as much of a problem because the plants were pretty much isolated. The only security you had to worry about was the wrong person changing something who was in the plant already. But now it's a little bit more risky. So I'm really excited to hear what our panel has seen and done, how they've kind of corralled it or embraced it, because I've been on both sides of this too. So should be a great session.